There are many mysterious disappearances in aviation history that have left the world wondering what really happened. Some aircraft vanish into thin air, leaving behind no trace, no signal, and no explanation. While most aviation incidents are solvable, these cases have remained unsolved even decades after they occurred. Today we explore 10 mysterious flights that vanished in the skies and remain unexplained. Top 1. The vanishing of Flight 739. The mystery of Flight 739 remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in military history. On March 16, 1962, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation operated by Flying Tiger Line departed from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. Its mission was to transport 93 U.S. Army soldiers and 11 crew members to Clark Air Base in the Philippines before continuing on to Saigon. The weather conditions were calm. The aircraft had no known mechanical issues. The crew, made up of experienced pilots and flight engineers, had made similar military chartered trips numerous times. Less than 2 hours after takeoff, somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, the aircraft disappeared from radar. No distress call was ever received. The plane and everyone on board vanished without a trace. The final radio contact from Flight 739 was routine. The aircraft had reached cruising altitude and was en route on a straight flight path toward its destination. Then complete silence, when communication could not be reestablished. U.S. military forces initiated one of the largest aerial search operations of the decade. Over 200,000 square miles of ocean were scoured by air and sea units from both the United States and the Philippines. Despite these extensive efforts, no wreckage was ever found, not a single life raft, no floating debris, not even an oil slick. It was as if the aircraft had never existed at all. But a single piece of eyewitness testimony changed the tone of the search. The SSTL Lenson, an American oil tanker sailing in the area, reported observing an unusual aerial event around the time of the disappearance. Crew members described seeing a sudden flash of bright light high in the sky, followed by two separate glowing trails descending toward the ocean. The ship captain recorded the event in the official logbook and radioed it to naval authorities immediately. The description matched what might be seen during a high-altitude explosion. Yet, this testimony was quickly sidelined in official reports. The U.S. military never acknowledged the sighting publicly and declined to connect it to Flight 739. The aircraft was equipped with multiple radio transmitters and emergency locator beacons, any of which should have activated automatically in the event of a crash. None did. Furthermore, the plane had just been refueled, carried no hazardous cargo, and the crew passed all pre-flight checks. A sabotage scenario was considered, but quickly dropped due to lack of evidence. A lightning strike was ruled out due to clear weather. A mid-air collision was impossible as there were no other aircraft in the vicinity. The absence of any distress signal continues to be one of the most confounding aspects of the case, adding to the confusion. Many families of the missing soldiers reported receiving vague or conflicting statements from military representatives. Some were told the plane had likely encountered bad weather. Others were informed that mechanical failure was the leading theory. Yet publicly, the Department of Defense offered no definitive cause and issued a final statement, simply listing the passengers as missing. Flight 739 was officially removed from the manifest of active operations without ceremony or explanation. In 2019, over half a century after the disappearance, the names of those aboard Flight 739 were finally engraved on the Middle East Conflicts Wall Memorial in Illinois. This recognition, however, came without resolution. Declassified documents suggest that at least a portion of the flight mission may have involved a covert intelligence operation. Several passengers had specialized backgrounds in communications and electronics, and the timing of the flight aligned with key strategic developments in Southeast Asia. If the plane had been targeted or sabotaged due to classified contents or personnel, such an event would likely have been suppressed under national security grounds. What troubles investigators even today is the complete absence of physical evidence. Modern radar, naval detection systems, and airborne surveillance in the area failed to record any anomaly besides the initial disappearance. It is extremely rare for an aircraft of this size and type to vanish without leaving any trace. In the decades since, no part of the aircraft has washed ashore, and no fishing trawler has reported dragging up wreckage. The ocean has remained silent. If an American military aircraft filled with soldiers can vanish during a routine flight in clear weather with no distress call, no debris, and no credible explanation, then the question becomes more unsettling. What else might be capable of disappearing without detection? And how many other stories like this have been quietly buried beneath the waves of official silence? Top 2. The Valentic Disappearance. The final moments of Frederick Valentic are captured in a chilling radio exchange that defies conventional explanation. On the evening of October 21, 1978, 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentic took off from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne, Australia, flying a rented Cessna 182 toward King Island. It was a routine trip. The skies were clear, the winds mild, and Valentic was an experienced pilot for his age. With over 150 hours of flying logged, he never reached his destination. Instead, he vanished without a trace. What sets this disappearance apart is the chilling radio exchange that took place in the final minutes before his plane was lost. An exchange that has since become one of the most disturbing unsolved aviation cases in history. At 7:06 p.m., Valentic contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report an unidentified aircraft flying roughly 1,000 feet above him. He described it as long, metallic, and equipped with 4 bright lights. Over the next 6 minutes, he became increasingly agitated as he reported the craft's unusual behavior. It hovered, orbited his plane, and then passed directly over him. Valentic insisted it was not an airplane. "It is not an aircraft," he stated clearly. His final transmission came at 7:12 p.m. when he said, "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it is not an aircraft." Then came a strange metallic scraping sound. Then silence. The transmission cut out and Valentic was never heard from again. The Australian Department of Transport launched an immediate investigation. Aircraft and search vessels covered a 1,000 square mile area over the Bass Strait for 4 days. No wreckage, no oil slick, and no physical evidence of any kind was found. Weather conditions remained favorable throughout the search, eliminating the possibility of a storm-related crash. Valentic emergency locator transmitter had not activated. It was as if his Cessna had simply vanished into the sky. The final radio exchange was officially transcribed and released to the public. Skeptics suggested Valentic may have become disoriented, possibly mistaking lights on the water or a celestial object for another aircraft. But aviation experts noted that he had logged several night flight hours and had trained specifically for low-visibility navigation. Further scrutiny of radar logs revealed no record of any other aircraft in Valentic vicinity at the time of the incident. The area was under restricted traffic and no commercial or private planes had filed flight paths matching his description. Adding to the mystery were reports from multiple witnesses along the southern coast of Victoria. That same evening, several people described seeing a fast-moving green light in the sky heading in the direction of Valentic flight path. Some claimed to have seen a round object hovering silently. These accounts were collected by investigators, but never formally included in the department conclusion, in their final report. Australian aviation authorities suggested the possibility that Valentic became disoriented and crashed into the sea. Yet, this explanation fails to address the multiple inconsistencies. The pilot showed no signs of confusion in his radio communication. He never declared an emergency. His descriptions were clear, repeated, and increasingly distressed, most notably. The recorded mechanical sound at the end of his final transmission remains unexplained. Audio analysts were unable to determine its source or replicate it with known aircraft equipment. Over the years, various theories have emerged. Some suggest a deliberate hoax despite the lack of motive in Valentic's clean personal record. Others point to military activity, experimental aircraft, or electromagnetic interference. A few have even proposed that the event marked an encounter with something beyond conventional explanation, but without physical evidence. All remain speculation. In 2014, decades after the incident, a small piece of aircraft wreckage washed ashore on Flinders Island. While it matched the type of aircraft Valentic flew, it could not be conclusively linked to his Cessna. The mystery endures, fed by the raw clarity of his final words and the absence of any closure. If a trained pilot can calmly describe an unknown object following his aircraft, transmit clear positional data, and then vanish without leaving a single trace. The event challenges more than just our understanding of aviation. It calls into question the very idea that the skies are fully mapped, monitored, and understood. Top 3. The Phantom Squadron Flight 19. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle began with the inexplicable loss of an entire squadron of Navy bombers. On December 5, 1945, just months after the end of World War II, 5 U.S. Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida, designated as Flight 19. The group was conducting a routine 3-hour training mission over the Atlantic Ocean. The weather was moderately clear, the sea relatively calm, and all pilots were experienced, including flight leader Lieutenant Charles Taylor. But within 2 hours, all 5 aircraft vanished without a trace. A 6th aircraft dispatched for search and rescue also disappeared. In total, 27 men were lost. No wreckage, no survivors, no distress signals. This would become the foundational case in what the world would soon call the Bermuda Triangle Mystery. The training exercise was known as Navigation Problem Number 1, a standard route that involved flying east from Florida to the Bahamas, turning north for a leg over the open sea, then looping back west to base. Radio communication began to deteriorate roughly 90 minutes into the mission. At first, transmissions were routine, but then came the voice of Lieutenant Taylor. Increasingly confused, he reported, "Both my compasses are out, and I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale." Other pilots confirmed the same. The entire squadron appeared disoriented. Unable to recognize landmarks or get a reliable compass reading, Taylor insisted they had flown too far east and were now over the Florida Keys, but flight towers tracked them far off course, likely northeast of the Bahamas. The further they flew, the more distorted their orientation became. Transcripts reveal a breakdown in communication, logic, and morale. Some pilots questioned the directions being given. Others attempted to take lead, but were overruled. One suggested they turn west back toward the mainland, but Taylor hesitated. Fuel was running low. The sun was setting. One of the last radio messages intercepted was a pilot saying, "We cannot tell where we are. Everything looks wrong. Even the ocean does not look as it should." Then silence. A massive rescue operation was launched within hours. The Navy dispatched aircraft, ships, and submarines to search thousands of square miles. But what made the disaster even stranger was what happened next. A Martin PBM Mariner flying boat carrying 13 crew members was sent to search for Flight 19. Within 20 minutes of takeoff, it also disappeared. A tanker in the vicinity reported seeing a mid-air explosion and a fireball descending into the sea, yet no remains were ever found. The search continued for 5 days, covering over 250,000 square miles. Not a single trace of any of the 6 aircraft was ever recovered. The official Navy investigation left more questions than answers. Their final report labeled the disappearance as cause unknown. Internal memos revealed disagreement among officers, with some pushing for a mechanical failure explanation, while others pointed to navigational confusion. Lieutenant Taylor's mother insisted that he was an experienced pilot who had flown that route many times. The suggestion that he simply got lost was to her impossible. Later, theories ranged from methane gas eruptions in the seafloor to sudden storms and magnetic anomalies. Some pointed to a flaw in the compasses. Others argued that the aircraft might have flown out of radio range and simply run out of fuel over open water. Yet, none of these explanations account for the total lack of debris, especially with 6 separate aircraft disappearing in the same region within hours. The Flight 19 case became a defining story in the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. But beneath the pop culture interpretations lies a genuine and deeply troubling mystery. How could multiple trained military pilots, all flying together in formation, experience complete disorientation and equipment failure simultaneously? And why did the rescue plane vanish just as inexplicably? If one disappearance is a tragedy, 2 is a coincidence. But 6 aircraft and 27 men vanishing under clear skies and controlled conditions demands a deeper inquiry. There are zones on this planet where logic falters, where instruments deceive, and where even discipline cannot prevent collapse. Flight 19 flew into such a zone and never returned. Top 4. The disappearance of MH370. The modern world was shocked when a massive commercial airliner vanished despite advanced global tracking systems. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bound for Beijing. On board were 239 people, including passengers and crew. It was a routine flight aboard a Boeing 777-200ER, one of the safest and most reliable aircraft in modern aviation. 40 minutes into the journey, as the plane approached Vietnamese airspace, it silently vanished from the civilian radar. The last words from the cockpit were calm and unremarkable. "Good night, Malaysian 370," moments later. The aircraft simply ceased to exist in the eyes of air traffic control. It was the beginning of one of the most extensive and baffling aviation mysteries in recorded history. What followed defied logic. Military radar later detected the aircraft turning sharply westward, back over the Malaysian peninsula, and then continuing southward into the Indian Ocean. No distress signal was sent. The plane transponder had been manually turned off. Satellite pings known as handshakes confirmed that the aircraft continued flying for more than 6 hours after disappearing from radar. Yet, its path made no sense. It deviated entirely from its intended course and entered a part of the world with little to no radar coverage. These facts were not revealed until days after the disappearance, prompting international outrage and confusion. The search for MH370 became the largest in aviation history. Dozens of countries participated. Advanced sonar scanning vessels scoured the ocean floor. Satellite companies were brought in to reanalyze raw data. But the search zone was vast, covering tens of thousands of square kilometers of some of the most remote ocean on the planet. Years passed. No trace of the main fuselage was found. Only scattered debris confirmed to be from MH370, washed up on distant shores like Reunion Island, Mozambique, and Madagascar. None of the recovered parts offered clues to the cause of the disappearance. Investigators considered multiple possibilities. Was there a catastrophic mechanical failure, a hijacking, a pilot-initiated event? Yet no theory accounted for every anomaly. If the plane had suffered a major failure, why was there no distress call? If it was hijacked, why was there no claim of responsibility? And if it was a deliberate act, what was the motive? And why end in one of the most desolate parts of the ocean? Scrutiny eventually turned to the captain, Zaharia Ahmad Shah. Analysts discovered a flight simulation wrote on his home computer that eerily resembled the final suspected flight path of MH370. Some believed he had conducted a practice run of a mass murder-suicide. Others disputed this, pointing out that Zahari had no history of instability, no note, and no known motive. The simulator data, they argued, could have been purely hypothetical. Meanwhile, no evidence emerged to directly implicate him or any member of the crew. A final report released in 2018 offered no conclusive explanation. It acknowledged that the aircraft had been deliberately diverted, but could not determine who was responsible or why. Families of the passengers were left with nothing but unanswered questions. Several governments quietly closed their investigations. The black boxes were never recovered. Despite billions of dollars spent in state-of-the-art search technology, the final resting place of MH370 remains unknown. What makes this case especially disturbing is how a commercial airliner in the 21st century could disappear so completely. In an age where every smartphone is tracked, where global positioning systems operate with pinpoint accuracy, a 250-ton aircraft eluded every detection system for hours, not in a war zone, not in secret, but during a commercial flight along a major travel corridor. If MH370 can vanish in a world of satellites, radar, and international aviation oversight, what else can disappear? The incident exposed not only the limits of current tracking systems, but also the fragility of global cooperation in times of crisis. It raised uncomfortable questions about data transparency, government accountability, and the illusion of control in modern aviation. The mystery of MH370 endures, and every unanswered question points to a deeper problem, that even in the age of technology, there are still places in the world where silence reigns and the sky itself withholds its truths. Top 5. The Michigan Lake Disruption. A domestic flight over the Great Lakes ended in a total disappearance that remains unsolved to this day. On the night of June 23, 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 departed from LaGuardia Airport, New York, bound for Seattle, Washington, with a scheduled stopover in Minneapolis. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-4, was carrying 55 passengers and 3 crew members. As the flight crossed over Lake Michigan, approaching the shoreline near Benton Harbor, the pilot requested clearance to descend from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet due to turbulent weather ahead. Minutes later, all contact was lost. No mayday was issued. No emergency beacon was triggered. Flight 22501 had vanished. The aircraft disappeared just before midnight. Within hours, a massive search operation was underway. The U.S. Coast Guard, Navy, Civil Aeronautics Administration, and local authorities deployed aircraft and ships to scan the lake surface. Radar data from the time was minimal, as commercial tracking technology was still in its early stages. Despite these limitations, searchers were optimistic. The lake was large but bordered by towns and ports. If a crash had occurred, surely debris would be visible. The first clue arrived 2 days later, when a Coast Guard cutter discovered small fragments of the plane and human remains floating roughly 15 miles offshore. But that was all. No fuselage, no wings, no engines. Divers and sonar teams focused on the suspected crash site, dragging the lake bed and dropping magnetic detectors into the depths. Yet the main wreckage was never found. Even today, over 7 decades later, the bulk of Flight 2501 remains missing beneath the cold, dark waters of Lake Michigan. What made the disappearance stranger was the simultaneous failure of communication and signal. Multiple pilots in the area reported sudden, intense static on their radios shortly after Flight 2501 was lost. Ground stations logged electrical interference, disrupting both communication and radar monitoring. Some investigators later speculated about a rare form of atmospheric disturbance, while others wondered whether electromagnetic interference had played a direct role in disabling the aircraft. The conditions that night were challenging, but not exceptional. A line of thunderstorms had developed over the lake, and turbulence was expected. Yet, Flight 2501 was a sturdy 4-engine aircraft, and its crew was highly trained. The pilot final transmission made no mention of distress. He simply requested a lower altitude. There was no sense of urgency, no panic, and no sign of mechanical failure. The sudden loss of all signals in such a short window remains one of the case's most baffling aspects. Over the years, the mystery deepened. Search efforts continued for decades, spearheaded in later years by independent researchers and diving teams. In 2004, a group led by the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association located what they believed to be promising sonar targets. However, dives confirmed the targets were unrelated wrecks. Time and again, promising leads faded into silence. Adding to the mystery are reports of unusual radar activity logged in the region during the 1950s and 60s. Military pilots and weather stations along the lake occasionally recorded inexplicable blips, objects appearing and vanishing without logical flight paths. Though unrelated to Flight 2501 directly, these anomalies have become part of the wider enigma surrounding Lake Michigan, often referred to as the Michigan Triangle. To this day, the case is officially listed as an unresolved aviation accident. The lack of definitive wreckage has prevented investigators from ruling out sabotage, pilot error, or catastrophic mechanical failure. In 2008, a memorial was finally established in South Haven, Michigan, listing the names of all 58 souls lost that night, but the questions remain unanswered. How does a large multi-engine commercial aircraft disappear in a domestic airspace corridor with no concrete radar data, no emergency signal, and no wreckage to analyze? The incident reveals a terrifying blind spot in air travel, one where even short-range flights over familiar territory can end in total disappearance. The surface of Lake Michigan appears calm and shallow in places, but beneath lies a depth that has swallowed ships, planes, and evidence alike. Flight 2501 became part of that hidden silence, and its unanswered ending continues to echo over the waves. Top 6. The Helios flight that flew itself. A ghost plane over Greece revealed the terrifying consequences of a single overlooked switch in the cockpit. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 departed from Larnaca, Cyprus, bound for Prague with a scheduled stop in Athens. The Boeing 737 carried 115 passengers and 6 crew members. Less than half an hour into the flight, while cruising over the Aegean Sea, Greek air traffic control attempted to contact the aircraft after it entered their airspace without establishing communication. There was no response. Attempts to hail the pilots failed. Military jets were scrambled. What they found in the sky sent a wave of dread through aviation circles worldwide. The aircraft was flying normally but unresponsive and appeared to be entirely without conscious crew. When the Hellenic Air Force interceptors reached the aircraft near Athens, they observed a chilling scene through the cockpit window. The captain's seat was empty. The co-pilot was slumped motionless over the controls. The oxygen masks had been deployed throughout the cabin. No one appeared to be moving. The aircraft continued flying on autopilot, climbing slowly before beginning a wide turn. It was still airborne almost 3 hours after all contact had ceased, just moments before fuel depletion. A flight attendant, later identified as Andreas Prodromou, was seen entering the cockpit wearing a portable oxygen mask. He attempted to regain control of the plane, but it was too late. The 737 ran out of fuel and crashed into a mountainous area near Grammatico, Greece. All 121 people on board perished. It was the deadliest aviation accident in Greek history and one of the most haunting in the modern era. The official investigation revealed a chilling chain of human and technical failures. Prior to takeoff, maintenance crews had left the cabin pressurization system in manual mode rather than resetting it to auto. This meant the aircraft did not automatically adjust cabin pressure as it ascended. As the air thinned, the crew and passengers gradually succumbed to hypoxia, lack of oxygen, without realizing what was happening. Investigators concluded that the pilots likely became disoriented and lost consciousness within minutes. Yet, many questions remained. Why did the crew not recognize the warning alarms? The cabin altitude horn had sounded early in the flight, a signal that should have triggered an immediate descent. Why did neither pilot respond correctly, especially the captain, who had thousands of flight hours? Some analysts suggested that the alarm may have been misinterpreted as a takeoff configuration warning, which shares the same sound in Boeing 737s. Others questioned the efficacy of training protocols that allowed such a fatal oversight to occur. Another layer of mystery emerged from the flight data recorder. It captured a series of inputs long after the crew had lost consciousness, including control panel interactions, suggesting that someone, likely the flight attendant, had attempted to take manual control. His last efforts, heroic but ultimately unsuccessful, raised painful questions about whether more lives could have been saved had warning signs been recognized earlier. The accident also sparked debate over the reliance on automation. The aircraft had flown for nearly 3 hours without any pilot intervention, guided solely by pre-programmed navigation. Air traffic control had been unable to intervene meaningfully. The military had observed but could not act in time. The aircraft became a ghost gliding across the sky on a silent countdown to disaster. No system failures occurred, no act of sabotage was found, yet 121 people died. The chain of mistakes, silence, and missed cues formed a chilling lesson that even in the most routine of flights, one overlooked switch, one misunderstood signal can lead to tragedy. The wreckage yielded answers, but not peace. Families were left to grapple with a crash that happened not in an instant, but over hours of quiet suffocation. The passengers had slowly faded from consciousness while the aircraft soared untouched through clear blue skies. Flight 522 remains one of the most surreal air disasters in modern aviation, a flight that flew itself toward oblivion while the world watched helpless. Top 7. The stolen Boeing 727. In a post-9/11 world, the theft of a large commercial jet from an African airport triggered a massive international security hunt. On May 25, 2003, a Boeing 727-223 tail number NE-44EAA sat quietly on the tarmac at 4 de Fevereiro International Airport in Luanda, Angola. The aircraft had once flown for American Airlines, but had been retired and reconfigured for cargo transport. At the time, it was under lease to a company involved in oil industry logistics. The plane had not flown in over a year. Then just before sunset, something impossible happened. Without flight clearance, without communication, and with its transponder switched off, the Boeing 727 taxied onto the runway, accelerated, and took off. Two men were suspected of being aboard. Neither was licensed to fly a 727. The aircraft has never been seen again. Airport staff and onlookers were stunned. The runway was active, yet no one could identify who authorized the takeoff. Witnesses described the aircraft moving erratically on the ground, as if the pilot was unfamiliar with its controls. The tower attempted to contact the cockpit, but received no response. There was no filed flight plan. No transponder code was transmitted. As it lifted off, the massive aircraft turned westward over the Atlantic Ocean and disappeared from radar screens. It was as if it had melted into the sky. U.S. authorities quickly launched an international investigation. The primary suspects were Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic and pilot, and John Mutantu, a Congolese assistant. Padilla had extensive aviation maintenance experience and held a private pilot license, but was not certified to fly a commercial 727. Mutantu had no known flight credentials. Security footage showed both men near the aircraft before its disappearance, but no footage captured the actual boarding or takeoff. Investigators could not determine whether they had commandeered the plane voluntarily or under duress. What made the event more baffling was the aircraft itself. The Boeing 727 is a large, complex jet that typically requires a three-person crew. Maneuvering it solo or even with two untrained individuals would be extremely difficult. The cockpit features dated avionics and analog controls, especially in a freighter configuration like this one. How the plane was started, taxied, and flown remains a central question. Moreover, the aircraft had a sizable fuel capacity, giving it a range of over 2,400 nautical miles. It could have reached numerous countries, coastal regions, or even vanished into the open sea. Authorities feared a worst-case scenario that the aircraft had been stolen for use in a terrorist attack. The timing, less than 2 years after 9/11, triggered immediate alerts across African, European, and Middle Eastern airspace. NATO and the FBI issued high-priority notices. Satellite surveillance was analyzed. Ports and airfields along possible trajectories were searched, but no trace emerged. No crash site was found. No rogue aircraft matching its profile was intercepted. Weeks passed, then months. The trail went cold. A few reports surfaced suggesting that the aircraft had landed at a remote airstrip in West Africa or been seen in Guinea. None were confirmed. Aviation investigators from the United States traveled to Angola, but bureaucratic obstacles and corruption hindered their efforts. No reliable witness accounts, no credible radar returns, and no satellite data ever substantiated the rumors. In 2005, the FBI officially closed its active investigation. The case shifted from national security threat to unresolved anomaly. How could a full-size commercial jet vanish in the modern era? Unlike small private planes, a Boeing 727 stands nearly 40 feet tall and has a wingspan of over 100 feet. It cannot be hidden in a hangar without notice. Yet over 20 years later, no component of the aircraft has surfaced. Not a landing gear, not a tail fin, nothing. If this was a theft, it was one of the most daring in aviation history. If it was an accident, it left no debris. If it was an intentional disappearance, the plan worked flawlessly. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that someone knew exactly what they were doing and never intended to be found. Top 8, the AN-72 that flew into silence. A military flight carrying high-ranking officials vanished over land, leaving behind a trail of political suspicion and redacted files. On December 19, 1995, a Kazakh government Antonov 72 aircraft took off from Chandigarh in India, destined for Shymkent, Kazakhstan. On board were 13 people, including General Yurtayev, a senior Kazakh military commander, along with several aides and aircrew. The twin-engine jet, designed for military and cargo transport, was operating under normal flight conditions with experienced personnel. The flight was part of a diplomatic mission, and was cleared for a direct route northward. But less than 2 hours after departure, as it passed over the rugged and politically sensitive region of the Hindu Kush, the aircraft disappeared from radar. There was no emergency call, no beacon, no crash site, no explanation. Initial reports suggested the plane had encountered technical issues, possibly related to engine performance at high altitude. But the Antonov 72 was specifically engineered for such conditions frequently used in Arctic and mountainous terrain. The crew had flown this model extensively, including in combat zones. The disappearance triggered a joint search operation by Indian and Kazakh authorities, with assistance from Russian aviation experts. Mountainous terrain and political tensions in the region complicated efforts, despite aerial sweeps and intelligence gathering. Nothing was found. Satellite scans produced no signs of wreckage. Ground teams encountered logistical challenges and were denied access to some high-security zones controlled by military factions, unofficially. Intelligence operatives hinted at a possibility far more disturbing. General Yurtayev was reportedly involved in internal restructuring efforts within the post-Soviet defense apparatus and had access to classified documentation relating to regional arms movements. Some believe the flight may have been intercepted or worse, intentionally diverted. Yet, no evidence of hijacking or radio interference was presented. All data from the aircraft flight recorders were presumed lost. The transponder ceased transmitting before any anomaly was noted, a rare and troubling circumstance in controlled airspace. In the absence of physical evidence, speculation filled the void. Some theorized the aircraft may have been shot down by a regional power concerned with movements. Others suggested the plane veered off course due to a navigational error and crashed in an unmonitored range. But satellite coverage, although limited in resolution at the time, should have recorded such an event. No heat signature, smoke plume, or seismic impact was logged. For an aircraft of that size to vanish entirely over land with no witnesses, no wreckage, and no signal is virtually unprecedented. Further complicating the case were reports from remote villagers in northern Pakistan who claimed to have seen a large plane flying unusually low on the night of the disappearance. These accounts were dismissed as unreliable, but they were not investigated thoroughly. Subsequent radar reanalysis yielded inconclusive results. A confidential memo later surfaced within Kazakh archives indicating internal suspicions of foul play. But the document was heavily redacted, and its authenticity never officially confirmed. Years passed. The incident faded from public discourse. General Yurtayev was quietly removed from military records. The crash was labeled an unsolved aviation event. No memorial was erected. No official cause was ever declared. Today, the AN-72 case remains a phantom in aviation history. Unlike oceanic disappearances, where wreckage can sink to inaccessible depths, this flight vanished over land within range of multiple nations, air defense systems, and radar networks. The complete erasure of its trajectory points either to a catastrophic event too sudden to record or an intervention too deliberate to trace. What becomes of an aircraft that vanishes in political shadows? The silence surrounding the AN-72 is not just about a missing jet. It is about what happens when national secrets, military assets, and airspace converge in that zone. Truth is often the first casualty. Top 9. The DC-3 that vanished before landing. A routine flight to Miami ended in a vanishing act just miles from the destination, challenging the safety of well-traveled corridors. On December 28, 1948, a Douglas DC-3 aircraft operated by Airborne Transport disappeared during a routine flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami, Florida. The aircraft carried 29 passengers and 3 crew members. Weather conditions were reported as calm, visibility was clear, and the aircraft was nearing the end of its journey, just 50 miles southeast of Miami, in range of both radar and radio contact. The plane made its final transmission, requesting landing clearance. Minutes later, it was gone. No distress signal was received, no debris was found. The plane never arrived. The Douglas DC-3 was a robust and reliable aircraft with a proven track record. The pilot, Captain Robert Lindquist, was highly experienced and familiar with the route. The flight had been uneventful until the final leg. At approximately 10 p.m., Miami Air Traffic Control acknowledged the crew last transmission. It was routine. There was no mention of mechanical problems, no sense of urgency, and no indication of turbulence or conflict within moments. All communication ceased. When the aircraft failed to land, the Coast Guard launched an immediate search operation across the waters off Florida's southeastern coast. Aircraft, ships, and rescue crews combed the area for days. The region was busy, well-patrolled, and relatively shallow in certain zones, making it ideal for recovery efforts. Yet, not a single piece of wreckage was recovered. No life jackets, seat cushions, luggage, or human remains were ever found. The aircraft and its 32 occupants had disappeared into thin air. The investigation revealed a handful of peculiar details. The DC-3 radio transmitter had experienced intermittent issues prior to departure, and the batteries were reportedly running at lower than normal levels. However, the aircraft had been cleared to fly, and no safety warnings were issued. The co-pilot logbook was missing from the documentation, and discrepancies were noted in the maintenance records. These oddities, while suggestive of poor oversight, still did not explain how a plane could vanish less than an hour from its destination under clear skies. The most confounding aspect was the aircraft proximity to multiple radar installations and its location within one of the most heavily trafficked corridors of U.S. airspace. How could it disappear so close to Miami in a region under constant surveillance? Some theorists pointed to the so-called Bermuda Triangle, highlighting that this flight path cut through the edges of the infamous region. Yet, the Civil Aeronautics Board declined to explore such theories in its official report, which concluded with the ambiguous phrase, "cause unknown." Over the years, hypotheses emerged, ranging from sudden decompression to mid-air breakup caused by electrical failure. Some even speculated about magnetic disturbances, interference from unidentified aerial phenomena, or clandestine military activity in the region. But none of these theories could be substantiated by physical evidence. In the absence of debris, every explanation remained conjecture. In 1991, a Florida-based salvage diver claimed to have located a wreck off the coast matching the profile of a DC-3. But after weeks of investigation, it was determined to be a different aircraft. Other reported finds proved equally fruitless. To this day, the final moments of flight NC-16002 remain a complete mystery. The disappearance is particularly haunting because it occurred in a context that should have guaranteed safety. Daylight had just ended. Weather was mild. The flight was short. The destination was close, and the passengers were likely preparing for landing, unaware that anything was amiss. Flight 19 and MH370 may have captured global headlines, but the case of the lost DC-3 remains one of the most quietly disturbing disappearances in aviation history. No flash of light, no radio panic, no search beacon, just a plane flying confidently toward home and then gone. When something vanishes at the edge of familiarity, where safety and danger blur, it challenges more than just our understanding of flight. It suggests that disappearance is not always a matter of distance or danger. Sometimes the sky simply closes its doors without warning. Top 10: the Cal 007 shoot-down enigma. A Cold War tragedy involving a commercial airliner revealed the deadly intersection of military paranoia and civilian flight. On September 1, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 07, a Boeing 747 carrying 269 people, was en route from New York City to Seoul with a planned stop in Anchorage, Alaska, in the early morning hours. The aircraft deviated from its intended course and entered prohibited Soviet airspace over the Kamchatka Peninsula and later Sakhalin Island, despite multiple warnings from Soviet radar stations and military aircraft. No course correction was made. At 3:26 a.m. local time, a Soviet Su-15 fighter jet fired 2 air-to-air missiles. The passenger plane was destroyed and all aboard were killed. The wreckage fell into the Sea of Japan. But what followed was not a straightforward tragedy of navigational error. It became one of the most controversial and unexplained incidents in Cold War aviation. Official accounts claimed that the flight autopilot had been mistakenly set to a wrong heading, causing it to drift hundreds of miles off course. But the deviation was so substantial and lasted so long that many questioned how such an error could go unnoticed by the cockpit crew. The aircraft crossed multiple navigational checkpoints without correction. Voice recordings later revealed that the crew did not discuss any deviation. Some aviation analysts believed the plane was following a deliberate path, perhaps shadowing a nearby U.S. reconnaissance aircraft, raising the possibility that it was being used for covert surveillance. When CAL-007 was shot down, it was flying in close proximity to an RC-135, a U.S. spy plane operating in the same region. This coincidence triggered immediate suspicions from Soviet authorities who claimed the Boeing 747 was being used as a cover for intelligence gathering. Western officials denied this, stating that the commercial flight had nothing to do with military operations. But many observers remained unconvinced, especially after details emerged about the timing of intelligence flights in the region and the failure of the Korean crew to respond to multiple communications attempts. Recovery operations were tightly controlled. The Soviet Navy reached the crash site first and refused international access. For months, they denied locating the black boxes. When the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were eventually released, their contents were heavily scrutinized. The final moments revealed confusion in the cockpit, but no awareness of interceptors or missile tracking. Some segments of audio were inexplicably missing. These gaps, paired with Soviet secrecy and conflicting reports, only deepened the mystery. Even more troubling were the recovered remains or lack thereof. Only a portion of the bodies were ever recovered, and several autopsy reports described strange injuries inconsistent with high-altitude decompression. No explosive residue was found on certain fragments, and several key parts of the fuselage were never located. The Soviet Union maintained that the aircraft broke apart in midair after being hit, but without access to the full wreckage. Independent verification was impossible. The incident nearly escalated into a major international conflict. U.S. President Ronald Reagan condemned the Soviet action as a massacre. The Soviet Union insisted it had acted in defense of its airspace. But as diplomatic tensions mounted, the truth became less a matter of evidence and more a matter of narrative control. In the years that followed, both nations maintained incomplete versions of the story, each leaving gaps that have never been fully resolved. In 1993, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russian officials finally handed over the black box recordings. While these clarified some technical aspects of the final minutes, they failed to explain why the aircraft continued on a course so far from its intended path, and why no effort was made to evade or acknowledge interception. The KL-07 case occupies a strange space in aviation history. It was not merely a tragedy of mistaken identity. It was a moment where military paranoia, geopolitical secrecy, and civil aviation collided in deadly silence. The passengers aboard Flight 007 were victims not just of missiles, but of questions never fully asked and truths never fully told. When an aircraft is downed in full view of the world, but the story behind it remains incomplete, the mystery is no longer just about what happened in the sky. It becomes a window into what powerful nations choose to hide, even when the wreckage lies in plain sight. These 10 disappearances do not stand alone. They are not mere accidents lost to the randomness of fate or the vastness of oceans. When viewed together, they form a chilling pattern, a series of controlled, investigated, and often witnessed vanishing points that left behind more questions than answers. These were not rogue pilots in stormy skies or malfunctioning engines in forgotten jungles. These were aircraft tracked by radar, cleared by control towers, carrying trained crews, and watched by the eyes of the modern world. And still, they disappeared. Each incident unfolded within a framework meant to prevent this very outcome. Air traffic control systems, military radar grids, global distress frequencies, and search and rescue protocols were all in place. Yet, in every case, these systems either failed or were inexplicably bypassed. And when investigators reached the edge of what could be measured and explained, what followed was almost always the same. A sudden silence, a redacted file, a classified report, a press release filled with technical placeholders but devoid of conclusions. This is not just about lost aircraft. It is about a system that repeatedly stops just short of revealing the full truth. A pattern of omission, of questions cut off mid-sentence, of disappearances that do not follow the laws of aviation, physics, or logic as we know them. Witnesses speak of lights, distortions, or disorientation. Radar data vanishes. Final recordings are incomplete. Wreckage, if recovered at all, often raises more suspicion than clarity. What connects these events is not geography. It is not aircraft type, weather, or even pilot error. What connects them is what comes next. The suppression, the silence, the way entire institutions seem to retreat behind a veil of plausible deniability. In each case, families are left with partial answers. The public is given a cause unknown, and the sky reclaims its secrets without protest. But if the silence is this coordinated, then the implications are deeper than aviation anomalies. They suggest an ongoing effort to contain something, whether it is a flaw in our understanding of reality, a vulnerability in our technological confidence, or a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. Because if even one of these incidents occurred due to factors beyond conventional explanation, then the structures we rely on to keep the skies safe may be illusory. The cost is not only counted in lives lost, it is measured in what we might have learned. The missing aircraft are also missing opportunities. Each wreck buried in secrecy is a suppressed chapter in the evolution of human knowledge. If something unknown is interfering with flight, space, or perception, then every unresolved case is not just a mystery, but a warning. We are told that commercial aviation is one of the safest domains of human activity, that every flight is mapped, monitored, and controlled. But these 10 cases are proof that control is sometimes a narrative, not a reality. In the skies above us, patterns have formed, patterns that suggest our understanding is incomplete, our explanations insufficient, and our trust in absolute safety misplaced. The tragedy is not just that these flights disappeared, it is that the truth may have vanished with them, and that no one is willing to admit just how high the silence goes. If these stories of vanished wings and silent skies have changed how you look at the horizon, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history they tried to bury. Plant the seeds for the future. The next treasure of the unknown will be revealed soon.